Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, I'm actually a big fan of law enforcement, and I don't take any delight in asking the questions I'm going to ask you. But law enforcement are given unique powers in our society, and with those unique powers come unique responsibilities. And I can't think of any responsibility greater than guarding the safety and security of our President and his family. So as I understand it, several agents believed that shots were fired, and a supervisor concluded that it was a vehicle backfiring. Even if that were true, given the very small investment of resources, why not investigate the shots fired?
Representative, I think that is where some of the confusion starts to come out, is the story that's in the Washington Post.
I'm not asking you about a Washington Post story. I'm asking you about why a housekeeper who doesn't go to Glencoe, who doesn't spend 14 weeks in training, who doesn't have 18 weeks of training thereafter, found glass, and your agents did not. That didn't come from the Washington Post. Is that true? Did a housekeeper find evidence of the shooting and your agents did not?
The housekeeper was able to locate fragments of glass on the Truman balcony, which is not an area that is frequented by security personnel.
And I didn't ask you about who is frequent. I asked you, there was a spontaneous conclusion that shots were fired. There were officers who believed they smelled gunpowder. Your officers drew their weapons, Director. That's how seriously they took it. So I'm not interested in cursory searches. When did your agency find evidence of the shooting?
I believe it was on the 15th or 14th of November.
Which was how many days after the shooting?
3 to 4 days later.
All right. So you have an officer contemporaneous with the shooting believing that shots were fired. You have officers taking cover because they believe shots were fired. You have officers at the White House drawing their weapons because they believe shots were fired. Now give me all the evidence to support a vehicle backfiring.
Representative, I am sure your familiarity with law enforcement in downtown areas, there is sound attenuation. Oftentimes,
I've never heard a car backfire 6 to 8 times, Director, ever. Have you?
I've heard car backfires, but I don't think
6 to 8 times.
I think it's undisputed that there were witnesses that observed shots being fired.
Right, and it is also undisputed that a housekeeper who doesn't train at Glencoe, who doesn't have 18 weeks of intensive training, found the evidence of the shooting, and your agency did not. And I'm going to give you credit because you didn't bring it up. It was brought up by a colleague. I have some colleagues who are just obsessed with sequestration. We can't have any hearing without it coming up. But you're not going to sit there and tell us that sequestration is the reason your agency did not find evidence of the shooting, are you?
No, I am not.
Okay. And I give you credit for that. And I was stunned that one of my colleagues would try to conflate, to use the Attorney General's word, sequestration with the fact that a law enforcement agency waited 4 or 5 days to find evidence of a shooting that a housekeeper found. So give me all the evidence to back the vehicle backfiring narrative, because we already know all the evidence to support the shooting. Give me all the evidence that made your department so sure that it was a vehicle backfiring that you didn't even search the White House.
The Secret Service was actively engaged with the United States Park Police in an effort to determine where and what direction the shots were fired on Constitution Avenue.
Madam Director, you reached the conclusion that it was a vehicle backfiring as opposed to shots fired. Now, this is the third time I've asked. Give me all the evidence to support that supervisor's conclusion that it was not shots fired, despite all the contemporaneous claims that it was, and despite all of the reaction of your agents that it was. Give me all the evidence to support the theory that it was a vehicle backfiring. And then tell me, why not invest the very minimal resources required to exhaustively search the White House?
Representative, oftentimes in these cases there are a number of different people that make different statements. What I can tell you is that Uniform Division officers on Constitution Avenue heard gunfire and reported gunfire. I can't speak to the specificity of the individual you're talking about that reported it as.
Well, can you speak to why a housekeeper found it and your department did not?
Housekeepers routinely work in the private residence of the President and First Family.
So even when there is overwhelming, let's just say suspicion that shots were fired, we won't say overwhelming evidence because that would have required you to search the premises. Overwhelming suspicion of shots fired. And you don't go through every inch of that residence? I want you to imagine a prosecutor is in front of a jury, Madam Director, because this is where sometimes these cases wind up, and you explain to the jury why a housekeeper found evidence of the shooting and your agency did not.
Representative, again, this case has been prosecuted in Federal court, and those explanations were made before a Federal prosecutor. And
thank the Lord the explanations were sufficient for a jury. Now, I want you to make them sufficient for Congress.
The initial shooting incident occurred at 9:30 at night. It's difficult to see at night.
How about here?
Officers
Can you hear at night?
Officers heard the shots fired on Constitution Avenue. Okay. Officers reacted, picked up security positions, swept the area looking for any type of injury, any type of intruder. It was not known until days later that these shots had actually struck the upper level, the third floor level of the White House. Okay, I'm going to end because I'm out of town with the same question that I began with. Why not search every inch of the White House, given the very small investment of resources? I mean, I went on your website, and I saw that you have training for psychology. You have training for survival skills, none of which I minimize, all of which I'm sure is very important. This is just processing a crime scene, Director. This is not high math. It is processing a crime scene. You actually don't need 18 weeks of training to be able to do that. You just need to walk around. So why wasn't it done? It is my understanding that a perimeter sweep was done. Was it as thorough as it needed to be?
Evidently not.
Evidently not. Gentleman's time has expired. We'll now recognize the gentleman from. I thank the chairman, and I also thank the ranking member, Mr. Cummings, in his statement. He's absolutely right. This is not a Republican issue, a Democrat issue. This is an American issue. I don't want it to be the political football, but we in the United States of America are self-critical. It's one of the beauties of our nation is we do hold ourselves accountable, and so I appreciate, Chairman, you holding this hearing. We have wonderful men and women who serve this nation. They do it patriotically. They do it. They put their lives in line. They walk away from their families and their spouses. They don't know what the day is going to bring them, and they do so in a very, very honorable way. And we thank them for their service and their dedication. But I have serious concerns about the current leadership. I have concerns about training, and I have concerns about protocol. And that's what I want to get at today. Since the current director has taken on this role, it's also important to note that she was the chief of staff since 2008. And so over the last several years, it's not good enough to just simply excuse this as something we were trying to clean up before because she was the chief of staff starting in 2008. I'm concerned about her leadership and the mixed messages that are sent to those that serve in the Secret Service. For instance, after the fence jumping incident, the Secret Service was very quick to put out a statement that honored the officers and agents for their, quote, tremendous restraint. Tremendous restraint is not what we're looking for. Tremendous restraint is not the goal and the objective. It sends a very mixed message. The message should be overwhelming force. If one person can hop that wall, hop that fence, and run unimpeded all the way into an open door at the White House, don't praise them for tremendous restraint. That's not the goal. That's not what we're looking for. If there were alarms that were inside the door that were muted or silenced, I want to know why that is. Who makes that call and decision? That, to me, is a leadership decision. I think at some point we need to go back and review the 2013 Inspector General's report, which actually said there's not a problem here, but has over 1,000 indications of security concerns. In the opening statement, say we have to be 100% right all the time. Everybody agrees with that. And yet the Inspector General's report is pretty damning when it comes and looks at what the agents are feeling like happens within the agency itself. Very concerned about the 2011 incident. I'm thankful for the Washington Post and Carol Leonnig and what she did in their reporting there. As best I can tell from the spot report as well as the article in the Washington Post, the event in 2011 where 8 shots were fired at the White House You had no less than 5 Secret Service agents report that they thought they heard shots fired. You had somebody on Twitter report that they saw somebody shoot at the White House. There were 2 people in 2 different shuttle vans who reported that they saw somebody firing a weapon at the White House. Blocks away, moments later, somebody crashes a vehicle, an assault rifle is in there, and yet the Secret Service is on the scene, and nobody ties those 2 together. I don't understand that. Later, the Arlington County Police actually detained this person. He had been positively identified based on what that vehicle was there, but nobody put it into the system to put him on the watch list. Consequently, when the Arlington County Police pull him over, they take his picture and they let him go. And it was only the Pennsylvania police 5 days later that actually find this person. Now he's serving some 25 years in jail, but he could have done a lot more damage. If the director is truly going to take full responsibility, I think your opening statement and the goals you have should also talk about leadership. Because as I talk to the whistleblowers at the Secret Service and others, they're concerned about leadership. I'm also concerned about training. As I look at the 2015 budget request from the White House, on page 39, there's a basic class totals. And I want to run through these numbers because it's important on the training aspect. Under special agent basic classes, in 2009 there were 8 classes. In 2010 there were 8 classes. In 2011 there were 5 classes. 2012 there were no classes. In 2013 there was 1 class. In the Uniform Division basic class, 2009, 11. 2010 there were 11 classes. 2010, 11 classes. In 2011 there were 6 classes. Then in 2012 there was 1 class. 2013, 1 class. And you look at the budget line appropriation for this, it didn't go down. It's maintained basically the same. Why did that training diminish? And then finally, Mr. Chairman, I worry about protocol. Again, I mentioned tremendous restraint is what the Secret Service touted. That's not the objective. If you project weakness, it invites attacks. We want to see overwhelming force. If a would-be intruder cannot be stopped by a dog or intercepted by a person, perhaps more lethal force is necessary, and I want those Secret Service agents and officers to know at least this member of Congress has their back. Don't let somebody get close to the president. Don't let somebody get close to his family. Don't let them get in the White House, ever. And if they have to take action that's lethal, I will have their back. In this day and age of ISIL and terrorists and IEDs and dirty bombs, we don't know what's going on underneath that person's clothing. If they want to penetrate that, they need to know that they are going to perhaps be killed. That's the message we should be sending every single time. And that's the kind of Secret Service that I expect. I thank them again for their service, their dedication. We love them, we care for them, but we need better leadership. It's not happening. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman.